Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We talk everything animation here, including BoJack Horseman, which we'll be getting into right now. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Michelle Anderer.
Hello.
And Alex Bonilla.
Hey.
It is the final season of BoJack Horseman, and we'll be breaking it all down on our recap podcast for season 6B of BoJack. The final 8 episodes of the show dropped yesterday, recording this Saturday night on Netflix. The second half of season 6, we covered the first 8 episodes. Their own podcasts. Find that at overlyanimated.com. All of our BoJack stuff, search for Overly Animated BoJack, and our YouTube is youtube.com/overlyanimated. The final season, including the series finale of one of the best, most influential animated shows, and just shows in general, that we've been talking about for a while. Very big deal, BoJack ending, and make sure you've seen the finale and everything that happens. Go watch on Netflix, come back. We're going to get into spoilers right away here for BoJack Season 6B. It's a lot to wrap our heads around and break down, but how about we start off with just briefly, what did you think of the season? Did you like it? How did you react when watching it? Michelle?
Well, it's a lot, right? This show has been on for years and years, and it felt like there was a lot to be wrapped up, but I honestly do feel really good about where everyone's at now. And everyone's at a pretty good place, except for BoJack. But he could be worse, right? He could be dead, so everyone has, a chance to move forward. I was feeling pretty, good and really into everyone's stuff up until the last 2 episodes, and then it's just it was so much of a stressful emotional roller coaster. It just left me with this feeling of I like some parts of this so much because they feel really earned and the best thing the show could do, handling BoJack as a character mainly, but also left me with this deep BoJack always gets deep and existential at the end of its seasons, but because this is the last one, it was just a lot, and it still feels like a lot, and it makes me really sad, but not sad in a bad way, just in a this really be life, and it's really hard, and oh man, if you make mistakes, you cannot come back from that sometimes, and it's just going to change things forever, and that is just scary and hard to think about too much, but it's important to think about, and I feel like just BoJack as a show handles that so deftly all the time. So yeah, I'm going to miss the show a lot. It's not always a happy, fun show, obviously, but you do learn a lot of things, and it makes you think about yourself a lot, and that is good.
That's good. Yes, that be life, and
that be life.
Okay. As similar to the series. Sometimes life's a bitch, then you keep living. In the series finale. Yeah. Okay, Alex. Brief thoughts on the 8 episodes we just got.
They were excellent. I had my usual BoJack experience, which is thinking about my past self and also,
yes.
Oh God, what happens if this happens again? Worrying about the cycles that life brings you to. So BoJack continues to do that, and I'll comment on Michelle mentioning about how we get to see everyone around BoJack, and I especially appreciate that part of this season where I feel like a lesser show would have gone fully all in on BoJack's situation, but this show has done a good job of keeping the arcs of the main cast relevant, and it feels good when we see that they all get a happy ending in their own different ways, except for BoJack, which at the same time with BoJack specifically, I enjoy that. We'll talk more deeper about this, but I definitely think that while the initial reaction when I finished the ending was kind of an emptiness, but thinking it over is this feels a lot more realistic to the way this would go on in real life versus the experience tailored for TV where you want a cathartic conclusion, like something that says this is the end. But in real life, things just keep going. And that's not necessarily fulfilling as a TV experience, but BoJack has always been more focused on depicting the mental illness and how you deal with the issues that you've made for yourself in a realistic manner. And they did that down to the end. They didn't sacrifice that for making more of a spectacle of that final episode. So in the end, I really appreciate everything BoJack Horseman has done throughout its run, and I think that this season did it in the way that they've always done it, and for that I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. This felt like a very BoJack last season, like very, very, but yeah, it was. I think one of the I really enjoyed it. I think the show ended strong, and the 16 episodes together strong. I think maybe these 8 episodes may be more solid. Although other than I mean, there's good ones in here, but I really like the series finale. This is like a very subdued ending for BoJack. I think this whole season very subdued, and like even the second to last episode, which had it's like very high concept, kind of crazy episode, is still very quiet for this type of episode. Like this, I do think this is one of the less flashy penultimate episodes for BoJack.
But it kind of fits with where BoJack is in his life, right? Like earlier in the season, we've had these flashier episode 11s because he's like in the depth, in like the middle, the peak of his Hollywood performance, whatever. This season, we're like seeing him on the decline, and he's still finding new rock bottoms. So like it feels very fitting in a way that like everything feels more muted than it would have when we were seeing him in the middle of his Hollywood career.
Plus, like, honestly, the second to last episode was the most terrifying episode in the entire show, hands down for me. And that's, I mean, there's a lot of sad things that have happened in like seasons of BoJack, but just like the mounting concern of like where he is being so wrong, and like we'll get into it, but like it was very effective, and it just carries you through straight till the end, and it keeps like Alex is saying, it's almost like BoJack is so anti-cathartic and so anti, like, lulling you into that sense of security that we're so used to with, like, blockbuster media. And that's part of why I really love it, for being so true to itself. At the same time, it's, like, it's hard because we're used to things being softened for us. And this is so not soft. It's just so messy and real and just... it's hard, you know? And that's, like, gonna be tough in its own way, even though it's not at all a bad thing what the show's doing.
Yeah, I don't think less flashy in this case meant bad. I think it's all very good, what we got this season, and I do think it fits, like you guys are saying, where BoJack is and where the show is ending. I think the finale is pretty remarkable in like, what it's doing and like how it executes it, and it is very melancholy, and I don't know, I hadn't considered that the end of BoJack would be about how like all the main characters aren't like gonna see each other, or at least BoJack's not seeing everyone anymore. It's like, and it's like depressing but also empowering, like, to a certain extent, kind of. It's very weird, and we'll talk about that, but and in general, I think first half of the season I was way more interested in what BoJack was doing than everyone else. I think that's still true this second half, but to a lesser extent. So I think we got to better, like, as we started to be like, these are where these characters are ending, it started to be a lot more interesting. I think what everyone was doing, particularly Diane, I think improved a lot this season.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we ended really solidly with her. But also just in general, like, even though I like really didn't care what we were doing with Todd and his mom, just like where's Todd gonna end up? I think so. You start to like get a lot more invested, I think, in a lot of these people. But so I think it's a really solid second half to BoJack, and the endings in particular, I think, very notable and good. And that's kind of the next thing I want to talk about, which is like, how does this feel as an ending to BoJack? Like, I think we'd speculated a lot. What would happen to the character? How is the show going to go out? And I think maybe surprisingly, the show does a lot of different things, actually. Like, it kind of is maybe aware of different things it could do to end the show, and it kind of does multiple things.
Yes.
Which is kind of like a pretty bold approach, Michelle.
No, it is. I never expected it to be able to do both. Because, like, I remember Dylan back last season, I kept being like, man, like, I feel like BoJack really has to go to jail. Like, that's the only thing that we satisfy. And you're like, I don't know. I feel like maybe he's gonna die, though. And, like, I scream so loud when he's, like, put behind bars. Because, like, there are all those fake outs at the beginning of the last
you think he's
episode.
Dead through the entire second to last episode.
And it's, like, again, like, that, like, emotional stress and whiplash just, like, carries you through it all. And then it's like, oh, no, he's in jail, though. But they did kind of give us both ways of that. And I think it's really wonderful because it's showing both, like, the physical repercussions of, like, you know, his addiction on his body and the threat of death to that. Like, you can't keep doing that to yourself with no consequences, especially as you get older. But then also the social ramifications of that, where everyone just hates him and he goes to prison and he, like, crosses that line and he's doing his time, and, like, maybe it's even a good thing for him. But, like, the fact that he actually went to prison, I'm just so... Yes. Because that's, like, a consequence people understand, you know? Like, I don't want to do bad things because I could go to jail. So it's just it is kind of, that is one cathartic thing to see. Even though, like, I guess it's fine. Like, his jail's not that bad. He watches movies sometimes, you know? He put on a play.
He was into it, but, yeah.
Maybe celebrity jail, but still it's jail.
Yeah, there's this, like, looming question is, like, is BoJack gonna die? Is he gonna face consequences? Yeah. And the show is, like, all of the above. Like, we have a BoJack dies episode. And I was someone that it was kind of, like, wanting certain things that would come with a BoJack death. I think you guys made good points about why that wouldn't be an ultimately good conclusion. Maybe because this character's associated with, like, mental health stuff, and so him dying might be bad for people, and also just, like, maybe he needs to live to face his consequences. And, like, I think, like, the show's aware of that and accounts for that, and then also does the good things. Like I feel satisfied as someone that was, like, wanting BoJack to die, because, like, we kind of get that, and then we also get the consequences and him being held accountable, not just from jail, but just shut out from the people in his life that he loves in the last episode, which is just really sad.
That's the most, like, that's the biggest consequence he really faces. Like, that is harder than jail. That's harder than a death, to just be aware that the things you have done have irrevocably damaged those relationships, and they just won't be in your life anymore. And you're just going to have to live with that always until later, you know? I think that's the hardest, most personal thing that he lost, but it's also so good, you know?
I think this is maybe the show's biggest thing it's saying at the end is like the consequences of you being terrible, or you're gonna, like, not lose the people you're close with. And at the end, one of the most notable lines, again, with a lot of quotes from the BoJack and Diane scene at the very end of the show. And wouldn't it be funny if this was the last time we ever talked? And then they just sit in silence to end the show.
Yeah.
Again, not something I necessarily thought of, or I think we necessarily talked about going in, is like that this would be BoJack losing everyone. It feels
for a while we've talked about these being toxic relationships that BoJack has been, you know, holding up for this time. I feel like that's come up in previous season discussions. So the fact that we're finally getting to a place where the people close to him, around him, are getting to that same conclusion that we've been seeing from the outside also feels kind of fulfilling in that sense, that they've finally been able to make their own lives independent of the toxic influence that BoJack has provided for all these seasons.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying that. And like this feels like so right in terms of consequences for BoJack, because how much consequence can a person like BoJack face? That's why I was maybe liking the death type of thing, because it's like, okay, BoJack goes to jail for a little. He'd never go to jail for life or anything, and he'd never, you know, he'd always be able to rebound. He's getting projects at the end. But this is like the emotional toll that his actions throughout the series have ultimately resulted in, and it's something that makes sense within the scope of the show, because at the heart of the show is a sitcom where all the characters are like just interacting, and so that, like, I think we're almost playing with like the core of the show, and then how it's ultimately affecting BoJack with the consequences. It feels like very right to me approaching that in the last episode.
I think also something to consider is that the show also drops hints of what his future post losing these relationships is going to be like. Mm-hmm. Like, we have this drop. It seems like a drop thing that like him and Vance Wagner, this disgraced celebrity, are going to do a horny unicorn movie, and later on, I mean, it seems that that's still going on. Also, he gets erased from the show that made him famous, made him a wholesome icon. He's just not going to be seen in that anymore. So like, you get the sense that even if he maintains his fame, it's going to be kind of a sad descent, you know? So like, even on top of losing his support system, he's going to be forced to hang out with people that otherwise he wouldn't want to hang out with, but because of the decisions that he's made, he's gravitating towards influences that are not great. And so you get, I mean, if he gets better from here, more power to him. But I think also part of why this feels sad is that you get the sense from other stuff going on around this that it doesn't feel like BoJack has much going on for him after this.
Yeah, like Princess Carolyn's not going to be his agent. They kind of like tease it like, oh, I'm going to need representation when I get out. And just like, I can recommend some very good people.
Yeah.
That says so much. And they have known each other so long, and their relationship is one of the more complicated ones. I'd say Princess Carolyn and Diane are the most complicated. And like, not even Princess Carolyn is going to touch that complexity again. She's moving on to bigger and better things. And it's not right for her, and she knows that, and she like drew that line in the sand right there. And I was just like, wow, this is really coming from all sides, and it's good. Like, I'm so glad all of them are doing better and finding themselves and being happy. But like, yeah, like Alex is saying, it kind of shows like BoJack is kind of left with no real positive, super great people actively in his life anymore. And is that going to hurt his life and make him, like, I don't know. It's kind of scary that we'll never find out, but it does leave it on a very sobering note.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll get back to, like, the how it ends so poorly for BoJack and what the show has to say about that. But in terms of, like, the note it ends on, like, well, how do we feel about the last episode of the show being kind of these vignettes of BoJack talking to the other main characters, having these one-on-one conversations? I think no one else really talks in the last episode, and we kind of get these conclusions for the characters, and then their conclusions for their relationship with BoJack. Very striking in that being juxtaposed the day after, I feel like, another very character-centric finale in The Good Place. Just like,
God,
poor Alex.
The Good Place finale and BoJack finale back to back truly killed me this weekend.
And I think they're pretty similar. I think we get goodbyes one after another for all the characters like that.
Yeah.
Good Place spoiler.
I don't know. This is not a very plot heavy finale, but I think I don't know. I certainly prefer the BoJack one. But this just in terms of this show though, how do we? Is this what you'd imagined how to end the show with these series of conversations, and how does it kind of feel? Maybe it doesn't leave you feeling good, but how does it make you feel about the show, Michelle?
I think if you had asked me around maybe season 3 how I would have predicted this show ending, I would have assumed some of the characters just never would have found any happiness. Like, I would have assumed that Princess Carolyn would always be alone and always just be a career woman who didn't quite have it all, and that would make her really upset, or that Diane would always feel like she was too much and that no one really got that about her. But I think, like, if that had happened, and the reason I probably would have expected that to happen is because that is a kind of, fetishizing of drama and sadness in its own way that we're kind of comfortable seeing in a lot of shows. Like, that it's just so sad, and there's a predictability to that sadness in these characters that, like, somehow that's comforting in a way. But the fact that they all are doing okay, and they're doing better than they were, and they know themselves a lot more, and they're cutting out the person that's just not gonna make them be the people they want to be and the people they are becoming, I think is really wonderful, because that's the exact opposite of what my expectation would have been a few years ago. And it's not allowing it to ever dip into that kind of like romanticized version of sadness, which is so easy to do. And we know what that looks like. We've seen it a million times. And instead, everyone's doing okay, and it's just BoJack who's going to be left behind. And his sadness is not like... It's uncomfortable because it's anti-cathartic, and it just feels like you feel bad for him, because we understand BoJack. We know about his family. We know how he thinks about himself. We know all his regrets, but we also see a lot of problems with him. And it's not like we want him to fail because we hate him, but it's because, like, that's how the world should work. And the fact that it is working is still, like, painful to see with him, but it's just like... Yeah, it's a lot of emotions to summarize.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it's, so you're saying it's like heartening in a way, like maybe positive in a way, that there are consequences maybe still in the world for people.
Absolutely.
Even if it's someone who we relate to and care about to a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that should be more normalized, which I feel like is something the show seems to care a lot about, because it talks about it every season. So, like, in that way, it's just very true to the BoJack message of the show.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex, what do you think of this type of series finale for the show? Just a series of conversations. I feel like maybe the show could end it on like one of the trippy penultimate episode type things, maybe a more plot type thing, very character focused, very conversation oriented.
Well, yeah, I feel like we've always had like the episode 11 being the trippy, like very experimental episodes, and then the actual season finales tend to be these kind of like checking in on all the characters before we leave you until the next season. So in that sense, I think it fits very well with the season finale formula that they've done throughout the show. But like speaking to it as a series finale, I agree with a lot of what Michelle said. In terms of like, it feels good to know that the other characters are gonna do well. We can feel them in a good place, and we see them taking active actions. You know, they have agency over who they get to have relationships with. Yeah. And so that part feels good, but then it's balanced out by like being very sad. I mean, at least personally, like I do feel sad for BoJack, because even though we've seen all his mistakes, but in particular the feeling of losing relationships over mistakes that you've made, that particular thing is something that's happened to me in the past several times, and I'm pretty sure it's happened to many if not all people at some point in their lives. Like, we're not perfect, so we make mistakes, we endanger relationships. And we're left in that limbo of like, you're desperate to grab any chance you can to like win it back. Like, there are moments in that series finale where like you see BoJack like getting excited about Princess Carolyn, like bringing something up. It's like, oh yeah, we'll do this thing together. Yeah, we'll like go call around, because he's desperate to get that feeling back. Same with Diane. Like, he sees it slipping away. He like tries to hold on for it as much as he can. Like, he does this long joke to like keep her, keep her activated. So like that feeling of like, you can feel it slipping away, and you know there's nothing you can do about it, because the mistakes you've made beforehand are just not there. They can't be solved over that quickly. So like that particular feeling, I think they nailed it, and that's what causes this finale to feel very emotionally confusing. Because on the one hand, because we're from the outside, we feel very good about Diane and Princess Carolyn and Todd and Mr. Peanut Butter and like their careers. And so, and from the outside, like we see BoJack has done terrible things, and he's suffering consequences. So, as in terms of justice, we feel good. that he's suffering the consequences. But at the same time, there is still a part of us like, well, in a similar situation, like I've felt that desperation before, and it sucks very hard. So like, so the trying to like juxtapose those two parts of this feels very BoJackian in terms of like
BoJackian.
Yeah, like you get the mental illness side, but also, I mean, you feel good that it ends in a very realistic manner.
Okay, yeah. I want to dive into this even more about the BoJack thing, but to wrap up the finale, I do think just a very conversation heavy quiet ending for BoJack, I think fits the show really well, especially like a melancholy ending like this. And we'll get into like how depressing it is in a second, but back to
I guess if we're just focusing specifically on format, then I'm totally fine, because
that's what Dylan wanted.
You guys took it in a different direction. It's fine. No, but
speaking specifically to format, this show is funny. So if they want to do a whole episode of just dialogue, I mean, hell, they did Free Churro, which is just BoJack talking to the camera.
This is probably the closest thing to Free Churro that we got.
Right. Yeah. So like, I trust them to do whatever they want in terms of episode format at this point. And conversations between the main characters, give me a full season of that, because like all of these characters have different chemistry with each other, and so making the series finale that is perfect, because that's kind of one of the best parts of the show anyway, is just hearing the characters talk to each other.
Yeah, I think it taps into the best parts of the show, and the last episode of the first half was like not the main characters, right? And this episode is only the main characters,
right? But it was kind of the same format, right? Where we're jump between conversations between different characters that we know about different things. Like, that's just kind of the thing they do, and they're good at it.
Okay, this whole thing of like BoJack experiencing consequences and you feel mixed feelings because you relate to him. Yeah, so this is, I think, really interesting. So for me, I'm going to defer to you guys on this, because I kind of stopped relating to BoJack, I think, at some point. And yeah, I mean, BoJack, I mean, I think it's like, I'm not saying I'm like right or wrong or anything. It's just like my experience is haven't been relating to him as much. Of course, he has like very relatable emotions and mental health things going on. But like, once he killed Sarah Lynn, I was like, I'm not on board. And so in that regard, like for me, this is very satisfying. Him like him facing a lot of consequences, because I've really wanted this for a long time. Is this something that's really tough to deal with if you're someone that relates to BoJack? And I think the show is like aware of him facing consequences and like comments on it, because there's
all the time. They do it all the time. They always have since the first season.
And like in this, but like we're also this. I think this back half of the season specifically is dealing with what BoJack's going through, and maybe how this relates to our society and how people face consequences in our society. I think episode 5 specifically has some commentary about cancel culture, and it's like they have a conservative figure in there who's trying to espouse these and like people are trying to espouse these conservative ideals onto BoJack of like making him like a martyr for like people canceling him, and then but like he's and he starts to buy into it a little bit, but the show is it feels like it's aware that that maybe the people that are facing the consequences have feelings too, but doesn't care too much about that, right? Like it's like aware of that, but it never goes into like, oh, here's a critique of cancel culture. Like, I think it's like on the side of people should face consequences. And I feel like it's pretty subtle too of what it's all saying. Like, I think that episode's the only episode when there's anything specifically kind of said, but it's BoJack like at first is going to get out of it in episode 4, and like he has an interview and he's about to be absolved from everything, and then he only is everyone's mad at him because he goes for a second interview, and because the reporters get to them, and then even with him going to like even with him going to jail, he's still going to get work after. I think in the last episode, Princess Carolyn says humans have short memories. It's the best and worst things about us. I think that would be one of my main themes, definitely from this half of the season, is like what the show has to say about consequences, and I feel like it's pretty subtly handled throughout the whole thing. But at the very least, BoJack's definitely ending up in a place of like, here's the ramifications on BoJack's life of what he's done. Does it feel like is it a lot? Is that a lot to handle if you're someone that's attached to BoJack?
Well, I would say something that came up while you were talking about that, like starting off with Sarah Lynn. It's interesting that this season, the actual damage that the tangible damage that he's done to other people, that part actually gets swept away pretty quickly, because Sarah Lynn, all that ends up in is paying out a settlement. Yeah. That's over. The stuff with Penny never, it doesn't appear that Penny ever came out with it. The stuff, he goes to jail for breaking and entering, for being self-destructive. He loses Diane and Princess Carolyn because they see him lying through all of this, and they feel disgusted, as they've been throughout the show, that he is making these decisions to their faces. So, like, I find interesting that the biggest consequences that he receives in the season is not necessarily because of the harm that he's done to other people necessarily, but more like just his self-destructive actions and the fact that he just doesn't care about anybody else. And it makes like you see him have moments of clarity, like that first episode of this part, like you see him being a professor, like you get a glimpse into what it would be like if he actually turned a new leaf and stayed that way. But it doesn't hold, because as soon as he's confronted with anything, he reverts to those self-destructive actions, and then he has to deal with the consequences of that. And so I think that as someone who relates to BoJack, I very much relate to the self-destructive aspect of it, where it's where these decisions that you make in sometimes a split second. I mean, especially that moment where he's receiving the call from the reporter, like 5 seconds before they're talking about what to do, and then the call just shows up, and so he immediately reverts to lying. But like, he has no time to think about that. That's an instinctual thing, and he makes a terrible decision as a result. But because of those decisions adding up over time, that causes you to lose connections to people because of terrible decisions that you make in the moment. In the case of him breaking and entering, it's that the one night of being at the executive's house, and he just falls apart and ends up making this terrible decision. So that's kind of the part that I've always related to with BoJack. The splits. The idea that, like, you make a decision that's obviously awful in the moment, and you don't have a way to recover, because that is obviously something that requires consequences. But it's something that at the time, like, when you have a distance from it, it's like, oh, of course that was awful that I did that. Why did I do that? And you kind of have to live with it, because there's no way to turn back time. And that's kind of been BoJack's deal throughout this entire show. And it continues in this final season, where those actions are the ones that he gets the most blowback for.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and definitely true point, that the thing that ends up kind of ruining his relationships at the end is kind of how he's dealing with these consequences coming up, not necessarily his, like, terrible past actions. Although they do learn about a lot of things as well, but it's more just like the people feel personally affected by how he's handling things currently, I guess. Which is it's interesting, because I think at one point Princess Carolyn's like advocating for him not owning up to stuff, and then she's also it does seem like she's affected and disappointed by how he handles it ultimately, though. Yeah, I don't know, Michelle. What do you think of how maybe if you're someone that relates to BoJack, how it's felt with him dealing consequences this season?
I think with BoJack, I think of things like in two categories. There's the category of him as a public figure who has a persona and who it's just in general to see a lot of substantial consequences ever happened for, which is like, as you were saying, Dylan, yeah, he goes to jail for a hot second, but he's going to get work after it. And the public does hate him for like a year, but then they just kind of forget about him. There's like, there are those moments where, like, initially when he's at that diner, the server comes up and gives him like this gross sandwich. And then at the end, when he checks his sandwich, it's fine. So like, everyone's just kind of forgotten about all that, and it was just moved on to the next scandal, and he kind of gets to just float away in obscurity. So there's the public commentary on just like him as an actor, him as a well-known actor, how those people tend to have a lot more help in covering up and moving on, and the privilege of him, you know, as like a male actor versus, you know, earlier we talked about like the female director and the female actor who, like, you know, as a result of him, their careers have been affected, and it's not going to be as easy for them. So there's a privilege to a lot of how he hasn't had consequences. But then there's the other side of like the personalness of like BoJack as a person being, you know, because like in season 1, I remember him asking Diane towards the end, like, you know, like, do you think I'm a bad person? And Diane says, I don't think there's such a thing as good or bad people. I think all you are is just what you do. And I feel like we're the real sadness of BoJack as a character comes from that. It's just like, outside of him being an actor or like a public figure or what he like means in the world, just him as like a horseman who a lot of what he has done have been upsetting things that have really hurt people, and even the people closest to him aren't willing to be in his life anymore because it's just like one too many for them. And it is like, so saying like it is his self-destructive tendencies, but like I think honestly it's like the humanness of just the fear of, if you keep making bad decisions, is that going to be what ruins your life? And is that what's going to make everything terrible for you? That feels really effective to me personally. Because that's the most relatable. It's not about, like, you know, I don't really care about if BoJack's gonna like have a career or what the public thinks about him.
Right.
But the concern of like, could I end up sad and alone because I made a lot of really bad choices and people didn't want to be around me? Like, that cuts me to my core. And I feel like that's what sticks with you at the end. It's not that like, will BoJack recover because like people don't hate him anymore in the public? It's like, will BoJack recover because does he know how to actually like have a real life and to live with himself and to do the hard work? He keeps like having these moments of relapse, and is that, you know, even if it didn't do him in this time, is that eventually what's gonna like do him in? Like, I don't know. Or is he just gonna be really sad because sadness is terrifying and loneliness is terrifying, and that's a big part of what BoJack kind of has left. And it's just, you know, that's the most terrible thing I can think of.
Yeah, I think the point of like that's what the show, and that's what the show is focusing in on, is the things you were talking about, like the ramifications on his relationships and losing and it's like not focused on his career, whether it doesn't, and I think the show's like making a point, like, doesn't really matter if he's like dying or not, like it like posits that, but like it's the thing that people are going to relate to like that, which I think that's a great point. And I think we can get into that more with going through kind of all the characters and how they end up with BoJack and themselves. But last before that is like how depressing is this ending? Because, you know, this is like the depressing show. This isn't like we're not ending at BoJack's funeral. But in a way, this is more depressing, maybe? This like sitting on like 20 seconds of silence with Diane at the end. It's just very striking, I feel like, ending the show that way. It's just, at the very least, melancholy, but I feel like that's not even, like, maybe that describes the episode overall, or like the ending moment, I feel like, is like pretty straight depressing.
Yeah, Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I was just going to briefly comment, like, the first episode of this show is BoJack meeting Diane, and you see that friendship, like, it developed from a work relationship to a friendship to Diane feeling confident enough to call out BoJack on his bullshit, to eventually them drifting apart, and we see the conclusion. So it's just, it's funny that BoJack Horseman, like, one way to read it is like seeing the dynamic between BoJack and Diane, and it ends, you know, with just that kind of a fizzle where like there's no real connection anymore after all that time spent because of the actions that BoJack took over the course of that relationship, and so just to see it kind of dissolve away in right before your eyes, like it hurts.
Yeah, Michelle, how are you feeling right after the end of the last episode?
So because they held on them so long and they kept looking over at each other, and because the lyrics of the song were talking about like smooching people and love and stuff, I was like terrified they were gonna make out at the last second. Like I legitimately thought that was gonna happen. I was so scared. And then when it didn't happen and the credits started rolling, I was way sadder because it hurts knowing that there isn't even this, like, this small kind of, like, you know, release from just this loneliness and this, like, drifting away. And I think, like, it's wonderful that it ended that way, because otherwise I'd be very upset, because it'd feel very, like, disingenuous to how sincere this show's tried to be about relationships and things. But at the same time, it's just like, oh man, yeah, they're not gonna kiss. That's crazy. Like, that they might never talk to each other again. They probably won't. Diane made that pretty clear, and for good reasons. But it's also like, oh, you don't even have like a little nugget to hold on to that things are gonna be okay. And that was like the last thing to really like break me, because it's like, yeah, there really is nothing. So
yeah, there's nothing. That's how I felt at the end, was like nothing, an emptiness. I think that's like was kind of what it's going for. I did not think that they were going to kiss or anything.
Well, not really a big part of this, but I do want to say BoJack has had so many great scenes connected to music. Like they do really well with their music selection. I kind of think they whiffed on the ending song. Like I don't think it really. No.
Oh, Alex,
like, I like the song they use at the beginning of that episode more than at the end. Like that episode that they do to the montage of like, is BoJack dead, and like like cuts between like the different scenes.
It's
like
weirdly upbeat for like the reveal of the twist. It's very interesting. Yeah,
right. So I thought that fit a lot more than what they chose at the ending scene, and I point to Michelle misinterpreting the scene initially as evidence.
No, that's not evidence. The thing is, the reason that song's perfect, Alex, here's my rebuttal, okay, in defense of the end song. The song's all about like this sense of like intimacy and being together and sharing this beautiful moment and being happy, and that is 100% what's not happening on that screen right there, which is part of what makes it kind of dissonant and like extra sad, I would say. Like, I feel like that song was chosen very intentionally, but it's absolutely has nothing to do with what's really happening, and that in and of itself just feels really sad, and just kind of like, yeah, maybe their lives could have been totally different if they'd been different people, kind of echoing Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter's conversation earlier. But, like, it's not, and this is who they are, and this is where they are, and it's just over now, and it'll never be like that for them. And there's just no hope for that, you know? And it's just, yeah, it just leaves you, like, really sad. And empty.
I think what you're saying is that this scene would have been a lot sadder if we actually shipped BoJack and Diane.
No, but it's weird because
it's the eternal ship that never happened.
There have been so much weird back and forth. BoJack fell in love with her in the first season, and then like she got married, but then like they have weird interactions, and then season 5 she made several comments about like, oh, like what if we hooked up? And BoJack's like, what are you doing? It's not like that's coming out of nowhere. I think there was always a chance, and I feel like if this show wasn't this show, maybe they would have, and it would have been like, see, despite everything, BoJack ended up with the girl, and you know, and the very fact that they didn't do that but used a like romantic song, I think like says a lot of things right there.
So I'm reading the lyrics. I don't think it is ultimately happy or romantic. It's a little like, but there's like there's like kiss and stuff in it. But I'm trying to interpret it. But I do think it's like ultimately a sad song. But no, I like the song. I like how it's played into the blue sky that was happening. That felt nice to me in the moment. But subjective. Let's go through the characters. Because we've mostly been.
Well, can I just, since we're like moving into the characters, sort of connected to BoJack and Diane, I do want to say it's, at least to me, part of my initial reaction was I was kind of struck that BoJack and Mr. Peanut Butter are the ones who end up single, and Diane, Princess Carolyn, and Todd, the happiest endings, are the ones that end up in relationships. I think I've expressed this in previous seasons where I feel a little weird that that's the kind of the tone that the show gives, where like you're happiest in a relationship, but like I don't know.
Mr. Peanut Butter's not less happy though.
I feel like Mr. Peanut Butter really maybe ends up in his happiest place.
Yeah, because like his relation, he was constantly married to people or dating people, and he says to Diane when they're talking that it's like he didn't really know how to be him without being an us, and that he actually was really excited to see how he could just be himself and what kind of person he was by himself without someone constantly with him. So I think he actually is like, this is probably really good for him, and I don't think he sees it as a bad thing to be single right now.
Yeah, I mean, even if he's not personally happy, he's probably at his healthiest place, at least from what we can tell at the end.
Yeah.
I love him talking about you at the beginning. I was a Christopher Nolan movie because there's always women there, but it's never about them with me, right? Like, he's definitely the most self-aware we've seen Mr. Peanut Butter in the finale. But that's an interesting point, though, that a lot of them doing a lot of the characters with happier endings, maybe in relationships, although not like focused on their relationships with their happiness, like even. It's Princess Carolyn's wedding, but it still doesn't even really matter. I don't
think it's about them being like romantically with people. It's just that they found people that support them and help them be happy and healthy versions of themselves. Like that is hands down why I really love Guy, because Guy there were times when I was really afraid, like, Diane was going to push him away, or he'd be like, oh, like, I don't need this, like, you're too much. But he always supported her, he always believed in her, and he was so patient with her when she was figuring out just, like, her depression, and, like, encouraging her to take the pills and being there when everything fell apart and helped her put things back together. Like, I don't think it's about the fact that they're romantically involved. It's that like she found someone who can be stable and her rock, because she has been a hot mess for so long, which is again why like it just never would have worked with her and BoJack. They always like spiraled into like these drinking binges and depression when they hung out together. Like that's happened several times in the show. So like that would never have been a healthy relationship. They get each other, but in like some of the most negative ways. They bring out the worst in each other. So for her to find Guy, like, I think that's wonderful. And, like, the same for Princess Carolyn. Like, yeah, she likes Judah, but, like, it's not like him confessing his love got more than a out of her, you know?
And I think true.
That's because, like, they're already so comfortable and they've already been working together and depending on each other and helping this business grow, which they both seem to care about. And that's just, like, positive regardless. So I think like that's more the takeaway. They just like they're finding people that appreciate them and support them and help them grow, and less about it being like romantic. Honestly,
I like that Guy is not really present towards the end of Diane's story.
No.
Yeah. I found that very striking because I feel like he was pretty visible for the first half of the season, the beginning of this season, but then then it's just about how Diane's dealing with everything, and want to get more into Diane. Before, random thing with BoJack we haven't mentioned. I feel like one of his biggest fallings out is with Hollyhock, who completely rejects him.
Yeah.
That's pretty. Like we see the letter thing in episode 5, and then we don't see it concretely, I guess, and we don't see it followed up on, but it's just I feel like that's pretty brutal. Maybe even the most brutal one until the last scene.
Well, that's when he started drinking again, right? Mm-hmm. After finally reading the letter. So, I mean, I like that we don't have to know what it is. We just like the fact that he was putting it off so long, the way Hollyhock had been reacting even before the show aired. I mean, and like you get it, right? Because like Hollyhock, it's like she's known BoJack for a couple years only. She thought he was her dad. It turned out he was her brother. But, I mean, she didn't have a super deep relationship with him to begin with, and a lot of sketchy stuff happened to her when she started like being more involved in his life, and he wasn't really a great like person in her life, even though he cares about her and wants to be better for her. And I think, yeah, just especially finding out about Sarah Lynn and Penny, it's like she's between both of those girls' ages, and I feel like that's not like insignificant either. I bet she can relate to Penny and Sarah Lynn on a level that BoJack like probably doesn't understand, and that further complicates her relationship with him. So, like, obviously it makes total sense why she would want to cut him out, but like, yeah, it hurts because, yeah, just one more person gone.
Yeah, and that was such a significant relationship to BoJack
towards
the end of the show. Yeah.
Because she's family. Like, she was his one family left.
Yeah. Okay, back to... This is very depressing. Back to to Diane. Diane, happiest ending, Diane? Because she moves to Houston to be with Guy and his son. She has a successful career writing the middle grade fiction. She, like, learns that... she's like struggling a lot that with like she has to write her deep personal essays and doesn't feel legitimate not writing that, but then learns to embrace that. One thing is that she appears like to be heavier throughout the entire season, so she's like always taking the antidepressants, and like she like stops taking them that one episode, but then just like and then in the last episode she like seems to be looking back on her like she like says her LA years and not necessarily looking back on them fondly.
Yeah.
Seems like she thinks she's in a much better place now, although she also says she's grateful she learned to be grateful of the people who made you who you are, even though they're not in your life anymore. Which is like a very mature and healthy attitude that I rarely see from people. I don't know, Diane just like this character has suffered so much, I feel like, and I felt pretty happy seeing her in a not terrible place to end the show.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll say that episode 2 was one of the I mean, I haven't seen many episodes of TV or movie that really deal with antidepressants like in as realistic a way as that episode handled it, where like you get worried about while you're taking them, like, am I a different person? Like, is it just the medicine, or am I actually changing? And like you having to deal with that new dialogue in your life, and then like if you stop taking them and you go back down that road, like that ends up becoming another confusing situation. So like seeing her go on that road during that episode was just very, very meaningful. As with many Diane episodes, like I love when they focus on her because they're different problems to what the other characters are going through. I mean, she's dealing with depression as BoJack is, but in a very different way. And so we see here we get to see like the positive outcome of someone dealing with depression in a healthy way, and that's beautiful. So I really love how they treated Diane in this final season, and I think that she ends up being one of the strongest parts of this show if we were to begin looking at like a post-mortem.
I do think BoJack summarizes Diane's growth really well when he just asks her, once he realized she's married, it's just like, how did you learn to accept the happiness? And she says, like, I didn't, but I trust Guy. And I feel like that says so much too, because like, yeah, like none of us, especially if you're an anxious person, like nobody knows if things are going to be like quote unquote okay in the future, but the willingness to trust the people around you that make you happy, and if they seem confident, to just like believe that it could be true, or to at least be willing to try for it instead of constantly pushing it away out of fear, is huge growth for her. And it's like it's a good thing to like go for, honestly.
Yeah, that was a siren on our end, not you listening, by the way.
Yeah, don't
that's always confusing. I'm listening to podcasts. Okay. Episode. I love that point, and want to echo the episode 2 good damage. With the way it deals with antidepressants and the different animation styles, I think that's amazing. I think this is The best Diane episode ever? Not that that's a high bar, honestly. Because I think Diane is a character who's
in a different place now, yeah.
Diane is a character who's been great, and we've loved her, but I think the show sometimes has struggled with what to do with her a little bit. And this one of the biggest highlights of these 8 episodes is I feel like Diane's the most interesting non-BoJack character by far, which is not typical, at least in terms of like narrative. I don't know if that's a hot take or not.
I mean, again, like, I feel like from the very first episode, the show has dealt with BoJack and Diane as like two sides of the same coin. So I feel like Diane has always been treated as a main character. Perhaps she gets sidelined for stretches because BoJack is the title character. But yeah. I think that overall they've done Diane justice.
Definitely with this ending, I would say.
I like that idea of Diane being like very similar to BoJack, but kind of the opposite positive version. Because there are a lot of parallels with Diane. She also had a traumatic childhood with parents that, or at least a parent that made her life very difficult that she still kind of holds on to. And she is very depressed and anxious and trying to figure out her place in the world. But unlike BoJack, she's willing to embrace that happiness and to accept it with somebody and to try to be a good person. Whereas BoJack has really not. And that's why things seem, as okay as they realistically could be for Diane, but they really aren't for BoJack. Like, maybe that's the cautionary tale. Like, if you have these set of concerns in your life, are you gonna go like the Diane route or the BoJack route? It kind of being up to you.
Yeah, I mean, if they are mirrors, I do think Diane kind of gets the opposite ending of BoJack with like fulfilling relationships in her life at a fulfilling professional place in the best place she's been in life. Yeah. And I think that checks out if you look at how they've handled things. A part of episode 2 particularly loved. I think there's a part where the detective, like, happy animation style talks to the depressing animation style. I think that was one of my highlights of the season. That scene. We had, I guess, Diane with the guy's kid. I think that was aspect. Yeah, she's just, I don't know. It's striking that the show keeps her away from everyone, like geographically. Feels bold, and she ends in, it like really fits into her ending well with like her being at a better place away from LA.
Well, and also, like, it's interesting that the last time that BoJack, Diane, and Princess Carolyn and Todd are all in the same room together is that when that comes out with Sarah Lynn, and she gets to see BoJack act the same way that he's always acted. So it's like she showed up to. Well, I mean, I guess that wasn't L.A. That was Wesleyan, but like it's like a farewell that episode, and Diane like probably sees there. It's probably time to fully break.
Her and Todd take that really hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, considering we've seen those characters together throughout the whole show, it's really impactful seeing that. Anything else on Diane? Happy for her.
Yes, happy for her.
And she's engaged or married too, right?
She's married. I think she's married.
Yeah, has the band on that.
This is a very, very, very low bar, but amazing that they did not go for any fat jokes with Diane. Like it's just accepted by everyone that like Diane has changed in appearance because of antidepressants, and nobody comments on it, and that's just great for like a quote unquote comedy to avoid doing that. Thank you.
It does seem like I kind of wondered at the beginning if they were trying to say something about her feeling more invisible in the world as a larger person. Because there's a kind of the montage where just like she's like trying to cross the street and she's being ignored, or like she's trying to like get a different size and she's kind of being ignored, or just her frustration putting on clothes in the dressing room at all. But like I agree, like the majority is just like nobody's like, oh, have you changed? Like nobody says that. They treat her exactly the same because she is the same person. And I like Alex said, like I'm really glad nobody went for a joke because that just would have been terrible.
Yeah, I think it was handled really well by the show overall, and the great aspect of this depression storyline they did with her towards the end of her character. Okay, it's Diane. How about Princess Carolyn? Okay, Judah. So
Judah.
Okay, you talk about Judah. I'll talk about how great Princess Carolyn is.
Okay, I'll just say Judah and Princess Carolyn are perfect for each other. I've secretly shipped them for the past couple of seasons. I don't think
did you really over the rat guy.
Receipts, Alex.
Oh, the rat guy was bad. Judah was always.
He was kind of prejudiced against cats, at least.
Yeah. Judah is a clean slate. We don't really know anything about him, so that makes him eminently shippable.
He's in a band. We learned
he's
that.
a hipster Jesus, and he plays very. What? How would you describe his music? Just very literal. I don't know.
He's one of those kind of poets musicians where he, instead of like actual music, he just reads things for song, and that's fine. But yeah, Judah is great. I'm happy that Princess Carolyn found someone for her, and may they do paperwork together while exchanging loving glances in the office forevermore.
Yeah, that was really sweet.
Okay, now Michelle, you do the actual Princess Carolyn analysis, please.
Yeah, for the record, did not see chemistry between them, but that's okay.
It didn't really register to me till this season, but I'm pretty sure Judah is autistic, which would explain a lot of his behavior. Because he takes things very literally. He's very concerned when he says something and people say like, oh, like that's not what I meant, or like, oh, I'm mad. He'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I won't do that again. Like, he's very aware of how difficult it can be to navigate social situations when you don't pick up on everything the same way like a neurotypical person would. And I just think that's really great because, like, Judah's such a sweetie. And I think it's really nice that, like, his autism isn't seen as a bad thing. And it's part of, like, his charm, honestly. So I just really like that, and I wanted to point it out.
Yeah, that is true. Like, he is treated very earnestly. I mean, not to make connections with every show I've watched in the past week, but it reminds me of the Adult Swim show Joe Pera Talks to You, where it's just like a very mild-mannered person, and everybody treats him like a normal person. And like that's just something you don't get to see in the age of savage comedy. So, although I don't think we've ever seen BoJack interact with Judah, or if we have, it's been like maybe a couple sentences. But it's interesting they've kind of limited him to the most empathetic characters in this show. Princess Carolyn, Todd, and that's pretty much it. So it's good that we get to see him treated like a normal person, and that he's been shielded from terrible people.
Okay, how about Princess Carolyn?
Oh yeah, that was our Judah analysis. Now Princess Carolyn.
Princess Carolyn's my favorite character. She was always my favorite character, and I think, oh man, I think the past 2 seasons, especially maybe the past 3, have really gotten into her trying to figure out what she wants to do, what is like being her most happiest mean versus like what society tells her she should be and do. And the fact that like she's finally like she's willing to accept this love in her life, but also keep things pretty much the same. Like the fact that Judah really loves the business and cares about it and also works like crazy hours like she does. Not just because he loves her, but because he genuinely seems to care about the business, I think is what makes them such a perfect match. And it's just like, it just seems like all these pieces are falling into place. Like she has a baby. She loves her baby, Ruthie. She's figured out how to like manage Ruthie being adopted and a porcupine, and that's all good. She knows Judah and trusts him and has for years, and so the fact that he has opened up to her about how he feels doesn't have to feel bombastic. She can just accept it readily, and nothing has to change because, like, they've already been a team for so long, you know? So it's just such a relief she's been able to just like have all this for herself and brought it into her life and shaped it on her own. And to also know she doesn't have to be alone anymore and that it's okay to have support. And that like it's just she's so good at what she does and she's not being punished at all for that. Like the show's just really letting her be her most fully actualized self. And that's such a relief because like the thing that's so appealing about Princess Carolyn to me is that she always like she was always so smart and knew what she wanted and was so sure of her capabilities. And she had doubts about, like, her place in the world, but, like, she never had doubts about herself and how much she loved what she did. And I think that's just really encouraging to see. So she's the best. I love her.
Yeah, that's all great. I love how she she makes her own studio at the end too.
Yeah, she's always thinking of ways to improve things and get a better deal, to get the best deal, and to do it on her own terms. And it's just so wonderful to see.
Yeah, she's offered a studio at the existing one. They decide to make their own, and I don't know. That feels like a great place to end that character professionally too.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah, I think good stuff from her. In this, I guess, like, she'd been pretty, like, mom focused before, and this half season takes her with focusing on other aspects of her character too, which I think I liked that. Todd, a lot of stuff with his mom.
You say that with so many, like, pauses. I mean, I think it's a good thing, but we also don't. I feel like he's only really talked about his family maybe a handful of times, so it's harder to feel super invested maybe as other characters.
I think that's the problem, though. Like, Todd, for the longest time, he was, the happy-go-lucky character who's there just for jokes. So, like, we try to throw in the serious stuff in the back half of the show, and it's not sticking as much just because, like, it wasn't exactly there in the forefront for a lot of it. So, like, I can appreciate the mom episode just fine, and, like, I think that it ends up feeling okay, but, like, it doesn't feel as fulfilling as the other ones, just because as the other characters, just because of that, like, it's been kind of kept to the side for a long time until just now.
Yeah, I think the least successful of the character stuff, but intersects with Margot Martindale's plotline that ends with her being about to be tried and then freed so she can work in another movie.
I think it's amazing. Go her.
I was like, we've been trying to dissect. Oh, what does this nun stuff mean? And then it's just I feel like nothing had to do with anything, and she just left. Like, okay, sure, that feels right for the stupid character. That was the highlight of that arc. But also Todd has other stuff. He has he's dating Maude, I think, throughout the season.
Yeah.
And they seem actually pretty happy together, and he's taking a big step in finally getting his own place with somebody. And I love that she's, like, trying to ask him to move in. He's like, you want me to get a whole other girlfriend just to live with me? You're the one who should move out. You're living with your parents. And she's like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's so good. I think Todd he doesn't need as much going on, because can you imagine if everyone had, like, as many struggles as BoJack or Diane or Princess Carolyn? There has to be people with lighter problems. Like, I think Mr. Peanut Butter is another one that, like, he has some stuff going on, but not nearly to the same kind of existential crisis stuff as, like, the other three main characters outside of Todd. And I feel like you need that balance, or else, like, it's just kind of too much to really invest in any of it. So I don't begrudge the show how Todd is at all. I feel like you really do need a balance. And I'd rather care more about Princess Carolyn, because, like, also, these are people who are kind of older than Todd. They're in a different place in life. Todd is still beginning his life in a lot of ways. Like, again, his big achievement is getting his first apartment with his girlfriend and cohabitating. Like, he's got a lot of life left for a lot of things to happen. So he doesn't need it to be, like, super crazy right now, because he's, like, the youngest of any of them, you know?
Yeah, I guess so. And he also gets the daycare job in the beginning of the season too.
And he likes it. He's finding his place.
Much good place. And I was just very struck by the empathy and kindness of him with BoJack in the last episode. Despite him clearly being done with BoJack, him just being nice to BoJack was very, very good look for Todd to end the show.
It's a good look.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in an episode that's so weighed down with, like, seeing relationships torn apart in sad and melancholy ways, it felt it was a good, needed moment of levity to get Todd in there, and it fits with their relationship, right? Like, Todd, the stuff that BoJack did to Todd was more in the first half of the season, so there's a little bit more distance there. So, like, it feels a little bit more understandable that Todd, well, he's not as close friends with BoJack anymore, but he's a little more willing to reconcile that and just, like, be on at least decent terms with him, and so it felt good to see that in between the sadness sandwich of Princess Carolyn and Diane.
Yeah. And it speaks to his personality, too. Like, he is, like, a pretty nice, genuinely nice, caring person. So the fact that he would still be kind of caring and nice to BoJack as much as he can be under his own circumstances, I think, like, yeah, that checks out for, you know, his personality throughout the rest of the show, too.
Yeah. I was thinking of like comparing it to the Good Place finale. Todd is definitely the Jason.
Oh my god, yeah.
They're early in the episode too. Okay,
yeah.
What was? I feel like I had something else to say about Todd. That's okay. I was gonna say I don't think he's. I think this might be the last time he sees BoJack, despite their positive interaction. I think he. I didn't see a future relationship with
them.
Like
what reason would they have to meet up? Their lives do not intersect at all anymore. Yeah. They haven't really since he moved out. And that's the thing. I think part of the reason we like only BoJack is kind of sad as the show has made a lot of decisions to show the characters interacting with each other and with their own people outside of BoJack. They have a lot of their life that has nothing to do with him, and that's been pretty firmly established for a while now. And that's, again, like part of the existential dread that I get from it. It's like, yeah, all these people have their own stuff going on, and yeah, this is the BoJack Horseman show, but their lives are not about you, and you are just a part of it, and it can be a very, like, tumultuous part that could break at any time if you give them a reason, and their lives will go on without you, and that is some stuff right there.
That's some stuff right there, yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. Mr. Peanut Butter, to wrap things up with the characters. So I was just thinking, like, what did he do this season? Oh, Pickles was in this season. I remember when that happened. That was like at the beginning.
Pickles.
Yeah, Pickles and Joey end up together, and then Mr. Peanut Butter and Pickles, like, break up off screen.
That was hilarious. Oh, I gotta call, and we're done forever.
That's the most disrespect that they could show to this relationship on the show. Appropriate, I think.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah, so he's dealing with all that in the beginning, and then he's birthday dad. That permeates, like that's still a thing, and he's successful at the end, but alone and happy. Was like happy to have BoJack stay with him, and then happy at the end to pick BoJack up. So that's still a relationship, I guess.
But also BoJack not that good, because he's like, oh, if you want to leave, we can leave. Like, I'll be right by your side. And then he totally judges him the whole party. So, like, yeah, they have a relationship, but it's not a super close one. If it had been, I think Mr. Peanut Butter would have realized a long time ago that BoJack hated his guts. So I think BoJack's always kept him at a distance, but that's also meant never super letting him into his, like, real life, you know?
Yeah, and ditches him for Erica, the last Erica joke in there. And also we get the Hollywood at the end with Mr. Peanut Butter, too. Bringing in the classics from BoJack. I was impressed. Like I said, I'm a big Mr. Peanut Butter hater as well as BoJack hater, but I was impressed by his growth. Actually, like he was kind of pointing out his flaws in the last episode. Like it's not enough to like be fully on board, but what we saw of him in the last episode was very good.
Well, I'll say also a strong moment for Mr. Peanut Butter is that scene in episode 6 where he's on a phone call with Diane, and like also he's very self-aware in that episode too. I mean, honestly, then he also has like bad writer jokes, but like at the same time he's like recognizing to Diane like what went wrong with the relationship, and that feels like a big step for him. So there were brief moments of Mr. Peanut Butter's seriousness that I think did well compared to previous seasons where they've attempted that and been not as successful.
And even on top of that, my favorite moment with Mr. Peanut Butter, like in the whole series at this point, is when Pickles is talking to him and saying, like, you know, there's this opportunity for me. I have to take it right now, though. It's with Joey Pogo. I think it could be really good. And she has that whole line about how, like, you know, I feel like my life's just this lazy Susan. And there are all these small plates I want to try, even though I should be committing to the main course. And, like, Mr. Peanut Butter's expression kind of, like, slowly changes to this very kind of, like, accepting but sad and resigned face. And when he tells her to like go after it, like you can understand that Mr. Peanut Butter is realizing a couple things. One, that like he's not what Pickles probably needs, but also like the thing about like the not being able to commit to the main dish and wanting to try a lot of little dishes. I think maybe he's realizing that she is 25. She is not, there are so many people she should probably be like dating and getting to know things about herself. She doesn't need to be settling down and married to like a 45-year-old man right now. She is in a very different life place. And with that, like, it's not compatible with what he might want with her. So like the fact that may be what he was also realizing speaks a lot for his maturity too. And that's why it's my favorite moment. It's so good.
So that's a good point. Yeah, that was a big thing with the Mr. Peanut Butter's booze, and that's like a big thing that's wrong with him, and does seem like he's maybe making strides in that area as the beginning of the finale. This is kind of why I wanted to call it like a melancholic ending versus like a super depressing one, because like, you know, Mr. Peanut Butter, Diane, pretty happy endings for these characters.
Yeah.
Princess Carolyn, pretty happy, and Todd, like everyone except BoJack in like a better place, I think. But despite that, still depressing because we see it through BoJack's lens, and we see how he is relating to everyone and how that's all going down. Any scenes we haven't talked about? Like Michelle just brought up one from an earlier episode. Alex, anything that we haven't talked about that stands out? I guess there's a lot of Wesleyan in the beginning.
Can we talk about Wesleyan?
We haven't really talked about the halfway down episode at all.
Yeah,
that feels like a. We'll go there just briefly.
That's true.
That feels like a big thing we need to talk about. But one scene earlier, like in terms of like low key scenes that I enjoyed, that moment where they're on the whiteboard listing all of BoJack's stuff gone wrong, and the students are pestering him to like give a last speech, and we're at the point where like we know it's about to crumble. So you have that shot of the Diane and Princess Carolyn listening to BoJack's speech from the office, and you can like see their like changing expressions of like amidst of like smirking at BoJack being this way, but also kind of like sad that this is like the end. And then like you hear also BoJack kind of admitting that in his speech, like cherish this while you can because you don't know how long this is gonna last. So like just the holding on that shot of like keeping Princess Carolyn and Diane in that shot as BoJack is kind of giving his farewell to his normal life. Like that was a very powerful scene for me.
Nice. Yeah. We'll talk about episode 7. But Michelle, any other scenes apart from that?
In episode 6, I think, the one with Angela, the former executive, I really love the fact that when he's at her place and she gets him to sign the contract, and then she tells him like, oh man, I'm so glad you didn't call my bluff. And like he immediately starts like turning everything around on her, saying like, you're the reason my life is terrible. If it wasn't for you, like everything would have been different. And she totally calls him out on it, and she's like, you play these games. If I hadn't done this, if I hadn't done that, but you did do it, and you were here, and here we are. And it's like, whoa, that's what the show's been saying all along, is that like you can try to blame anything you want for things turning out the way they did and you being who you are, but at the end of the day, it's your actions that make everything possible for you. And it's the hard truth, but it's the real truth. And I just like was like, wow, Angela was this random character, but like she said it like it is, and that was pretty powerful. I also just want to talk about the BoJack and Diane at the very end, but I can hold off if we're not quite there yet.
In the last episode?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, what else about that?
Well, it's just like, it's so there. I feel like I'm really glad that the show kind of gives a lot of characters, but like especially Diane, the space to kind of like point out exactly why she's leaving BoJack's life, because she talks really specifically about like, you know, like I was really upset, like when you were gone, like I wish I had my phone so I could show you this voicemail where you told me like I'm like really drunk and I'm gonna go swimming. If you don't call me back, I'm gonna do it, and kind of making her feel responsible for that. and then like her fear that, you know, it would be her fault, and then her hating the fact that he had that power over her to make her feel responsible even for a second, even though he knew she was in another state. I think that right there is the exact reason why she's breaking off their friendship, because it is a creepy, codependent, toxic thing in those desperate moments. Not that they don't get genuine enjoyment out of each other's company. Like, that is some unfair stuff. And she goes on to say, like, you know, I wish I could have been that person you thought I was. But, like, you know, that person who could save you. And he's like, oh, but that's not your job. And then she says, like, then why did you always make me feel like it was?
Alison Brie killed that line, Reed.
She did. And the thing is, like, at its core, again, like, that's why they could never be together. Because when BoJack fell in love with her in the first season, it was because she was writing a book about him. That just made him feel really important. She had to listen to him because he was her boss and he was paying her to write this book. And that's like a weird balance of power, but it also made him feel like, oh yeah, she does really care about me. But like, no, she's writing her book because it's her job. And then when they got closer, like, it was weirdly codependent and just not healthy. And I feel like BoJack always, his love for Diane had a lot to do with this idea that, like, being with her would help fix him as a person. And that is an impossible thing to expect from anyone, to fix you and to be the thing to make you better. Like, you have to be the one to do that for yourself. And the fact that he hasn't done that for himself and hurt her in the process is exactly why she's leaving him. And it's a lot, but I love it because, yeah, Diane deserves better. And she tells him what that felt like for her, and you feel terrible for her in that moment.
Yeah, really good stuff on that. Yeah, that's another great part of their conversation too. I think the Diane stuff really steals the last episode.
And just quickly following up on that part with the part of the power dynamic, I do enjoy as well. Another piece of the season was hammering home BoJack's general dynamics towards women, and especially in that interview episode with I forget her name, but like the Oprah analog.
Chinchilla lady.
Yeah, but like, you know, getting called out on that, and like he immediately has to go defensive, like whoa, like I wasn't actively like being that, but like we've seen those things go down, and we can obviously see like the inherent dynamic, but it's interesting to, you know, depict like how someone can you know, blind themselves to that and just take advantage of it without ever taking that into account and the consequences of turning a blind eye to that.
Yeah, it's like the selfishness. I think what the Chinchilla woman says is like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to say like you're a bad guy who tries actively to hurt people. It's more that you just don't seem to care about what you're doing and how it affects others. It's the not caring that seems to be the real problem. And I think that's so true. That's exactly what BoJack is like. He's not going out of his way to hurt people, but he hurts people a lot because he's being very selfish and is not giving a thought to their own needs and what would be good for them, you know?
And doesn't take into account the privilege that he's coming from in any exchange that he has.
Totally.
Yeah, good stuff, and I agree that part was really powerful too. Nice to see BoJack called out for a lot of this stuff.
By many people.
By many people. Okay, episode 7, quickly.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So it's the BoJack's like presented as has his like subconscious dealing with dying. He's in a dream with all these dead people in his life, and you like slowly realize throughout the episode he's like dead or dying, and for me it was like eventually you realize, okay, he's not going to die because we wouldn't, I guess, probably be doing this whole thing, but still like a twist at the beginning of the next episode, and this the dinner and the show of everyone going through the door, and a lot of like the goo that's like consuming him, and a lot of like shots of him in the pool that we eventually start seeing. Definitely, I think a lot of highlights. A highlight for a lot of people is the poem, the titular view from halfway down poem.
Yeah.
Yeah. which second viewing figured out a lot more what it was like as someone jumping off a bridge and what they're thinking about as they're falling. Probably my interpretation.
Yeah. Well, earlier in the show, we saw Secretariat jumped off a bridge.
Yeah, weird Secretariat pull into this episode, but a lot of weird character pulls, I feel like, in this episode. But
it's just very interesting that BoJack has such little of a relationship with his dad that he decides it's better to imagine him as Secretary.
That's the most interesting part. Yeah, and they call that out, and Michelle, what do you think of this episode? How good was this episode?
This episode was really, 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 really good.
Was it do you think it was the best of the season?
No, but it's very good at, best or hard, best at what, that's a whole conversation, but I don't want to have that conversation. The thing is, they do so many things so well. You get the sense that, maybe it's a dream from the very beginning. It's there's a little Sarah Lynn in the overalls. Okay, what are we in for? But I think, the fact that it starts slowly building this menace throughout, and I don't know when you guys realized that he was drowning, but for me it was when he takes the water and he's like, oh, why does anyone else's water taste like chlorine? I was like, oh my god, no.
I didn't
he's drowning in a pool, because the black goop is the goopiness takes away from the fact that it's liquid enough that it kind of is you don't know what that means. That can mean a lot of things. But the chlorine was oh no, he's definitely in a pool. And the fact that everyone's accepting the fact that he's already dead. And they're you cannot escape this. And that it's a lot of people he doesn't have. He either didn't have a great relationship when he was alive with them, or people that he had so many regrets that it complicates the good relationships he used to have, and that they're the people in his life right now, or in this hellscape rather. That is just so uncomfortable also, and they're all reminiscing on the best and worst parts of their life and trying to understand if any of it makes any sense, and kind of concluding that they don't know, and maybe it didn't, and there's nothing after this, and they're all just leaving through this door. And that's all just so scary. Plus, I kept wondering, when they're at the dining room table, they all had very specific food. BoJack has pills, Herb has, peanuts, Sarah Lynn has, fast food. It looks like the uncle from the army had, something in, a can. Is that maybe, the last meal they ate before they all died? Or something? There seems to be some kind of significance tied to that food, because it's different for all of them. But yeah, just the mounting dread. I was 50% willing to believe BoJack was going to die in that episode. And it's just uncomfortable to put your mind in that kind of headspace of what if these are the ghosts from your past and they're all moving on and they expect this to be the end for you. And it's just kind of sad and scary. Mostly just scary. I just felt scared the whole time.
Yeah, very... the emotions the audience feels during it, the creeping sense of dread and anxiety and stuff. Alex, what do you think of that episode?
Yeah, just briefly, the atmosphere, they did a really good job with building it up throughout the episode. I was a slow person and did not realize BoJack was drowning until that point where it's oh, this is the part where I always wake up, and he's not waking up. And so okay, something's different. So, but when you rewatch, you figure it out. Also, on rewatch, that poem read by Secretariat hit a lot harder than it did the first time. But I think it's because the first time you're watching it, you're kind of just enveloped in this what the hell is going on?
Your mind is racing. You're what's gonna happen to BoJack? You don't have time for a poem.
Yeah, it does a real good job of freaking you out and putting you in BoJack's place of just not understanding what's going on. So then on second watch you get the details, but on first watch they do a really good job with the atmosphere. I'll say I prefer Time's Arrow to this episode if we're gonna compare penultimate experimental episodes, but this is still an excellent episode, and I think especially because of just the mind space that they're able to put you in with this weird eclectic mix of characters that you've not thought about in a while, but they managed to make them all interact in funny ways despite the weird atmosphere. And BoJack brought Sarah Lynn to the House of Death. Good for him.
I was happy with the amount of Sarah Lynn.
It was nice to hear her again, for sure.
It's a really good episode. I only seen it. I feel like I need to see it even more times to judge, but not necessarily my type of thing. Very metaphorical. If we're treating this as a penultimate episode, maybe one of my lower ones. But
definitely a lot clearer than Showstopper.
Absolutely, Showstopper is at my bottom, no question.
I think they're similar-ish in the, this was it had a literal thing that was happening, and we're supposed to draw comparisons. Showstopper's clearly more hazy. It's different types of metaphorical, I guess. I don't know, but I think they're similar in my mind. But certainly the impact it has and its role in the season are really good.
Also, the way this episode ends with him running through the goop and racing to call Diane, and then the brick that you feel in your heart, it's I'm in Chicago, I can't do anything, and there's no way that I'd pick up, and so you get this, you come to realization that this isn't happening, and BoJack is just kind of accepting his fate, and it's I just want to have you on the line while I'm it's the desperation of BoJack there to just have anything normal in those moments. That's kind of part of why that hurts so hard, on top of just the culmination of this whole creepy atmosphere just collapsing in on him because of what he's done.
And it immediately cuts not to music, but just the flat line, which I had to listen to the whole thing because I was freaking out. And when you finally got a beep, I was oh, thank God, there's hope.
Oh, if you keep going in the credits, there's a beep.
Oh, dang it! Credits, about halfway through, the beep start, and I was holy shit, thank God.
That's bad.
Okay.
No, you listen to the credits.
Insert Raphael rant about Netflix cutting off the credits
come on.
Right? This is makes sense. Okay, I didn't keep listening.
No, but it makes the twist less impactful if you know that.
No, it doesn't, because
it's the twist is there versus
5 seconds, and then you still don't really know for sure until he goes to prison.
Okay, interesting. I'll rewatch that. I think 7, 8, 2 probably the standouts for me looking back on the season. I think 8. The finale is probably my best. That's probably going to be one of the most notable BoJack eps looking back on the show. But we'll see, I guess, how the finale ages. I don't know, and how people react to it. I don't know. Yeah, my initial reaction is just the finale is so good. It's one of the best, maybe top 10 episode of the show.
I'm just trying to think about when am I going to be in the mood to rewatch BoJack Horseman?
BoJack.
Honestly, I rewatched all of it for this last batch for the first time ever, and it's actually, once you know a lot of the twists, it's a much easier watch the second time. Not as bad, honestly.
You can brace yourself for the terrible stuff that's going to happen.
You can brace yourself. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I'm never in the mood to rewatch BoJack, but maybe I'll force myself a little bit.
It's the best show ever, but at the same time, you need to be in a very specific mindset, I feel.
Yeah, you have to be in a really good mental state, and then slowly it might chip you down, and then you stop for a while. You can watch something else.
Yeah, more power to people who can do this all in one sitting, because...
Yeah, we'll see people watching the whole show and get their reactions now that the show's over. Just maybe interesting experience. Okay, those are all of our initial takes on the final season of BoJack. Kind of crazy the show is over.
Yeah.
So many shows about existence just ending. It's crazy.
That means existence is
But I mean, BoJack
temporary
is an ending. That's what I love. We said
all
it a lot.
The characters are continuing.
Yeah.
We said it a lot the last podcast, but the reason why it's so good, he's not dying, is because he would be a martyr. But it's not even about him being a martyr. It's because that's a way out for him to not have to face anything, and it's so much easier to just die. Death is a piece. Living's the much harder part, and there is nothing more cathartic than to live through the bed you made for yourself in this circumstance. And that's why it's gonna matter more to people. It's less scary to think oh no, all these bad things happened to this person, but then they died, so they got a release. It's way scarier to think I might have to live with this for the rest of my life, and that's gonna be so miserable.
largely depends on your philosophy about life. Like for me, him dying would have been much worse fate. But from a narrative perspective, I think certainly what you're saying.
And also, I don't know. I mean, I probably shouldn't like bring real life stuff into this, but like when a celebrity dies and they've committed terrible actions in the past,
them
we focus on their positive aspects. We shove the negative stuff to the side, and so you can And so I think that there's definitely more impact here of BoJack being alive, so that these characters get to face BoJack and like air out their grievances one last time, as opposed to like having to memorialize him and then it feels more gauche to talk about his negative aspects. But the fact that he's there to witness that ends up having a bigger effect on these characters than if he were dead and they had to all of a sudden shift their mindset on him.
Exactly. Like, it's prioritizing their feelings and response to the things he did to them, too. Like, it's putting that as, like, an equally important thing and not just all about BoJack, you know? Which I feel like the show's always been good at doing, is trying to flesh out their lives and give them their own humanity.
Yeah, I like these points. Yeah, that's they would have had to get into that stuff if BoJack died, and the way they did it. I think like they got some stuff out of like him dying and the feelings associated with that, and him grappling with stuff, and then they also got the best parts of like everyone living and the interpersonal relationships in the finale, and for right now feels like a pretty brilliant way to handle things to end the show.
Yeah.
So. Hopefully we'll continue the conversation on BoJack at some point. Even we'll see if we have more specific podcasts. At the very least, BoJack will come up when we talk about a bunch of other shows and comparing BoJack to other shows and stuff. I'm sure this will be a show always referenced and compared to and talked about and stuff. So, let us know what you thought of the finale. Overlyanimated.com, youtube.com/overlyanimated, our Discord, overlyanimated.com/Discord, I don't know. We could do topic podcasts about anything. I don't know what the obvious topic about this BoJack, but I guess BoJack is I think we talked a lot about it on here. But if you have ideas for specific other things to get into in the final season, because as mentioned earlier, we are not going to dive into the episodes themselves like we do normally, as mentioned in that announcement.
I'm interested to like think about other things earlier in the show that might seem different now that we know how it all ends. But BoJack doesn't necessarily seem like the kind of show where like it'll change much, but like still considering now that we have this final season now, like going back to say like Escape from LA, like what would that feel like?
The podcast is Alex rewatched all of BoJack after the final season and has some thoughts. So
oh god.
Alex alone with his thoughts for an hour.
Oh no. Michelle watches it again.
I mean, for the third time, maybe.
Okay, we'll see. I'm more interested now in the BoJack rewatch now that we know all of it. I think that'd be interesting. Yeah. Okay, so and then patreon.com/overlyanimated to support us. Thanks to all of our patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Lily, a.k.a. Panda Lily, and thanks to our patron executive producers Ryan, Steve, Alex, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, and Needle. I guess keep subscribed to the BoJack feed if you want to see anything that comes next. Nothing imminent, and no episode discussions, as I said. But
maybe Tuca and Birdie season 2, please.
Oh, anybody? God, anybody? Don't twist my heart anymore, Alex. Please.
I need a chaser.
Yeah, I would love a chaser.
I mean, that would be nice, but
be the perfect chaser.
We've
Come on,
Netflix. Absolutely no word on that as of now. We will be getting
more depressing than this finale.
In some ways, it honestly is.
Yeah, we will be getting Undone season 2, which Raphael is.
That's true. That's true. That's not the
also
same.
Depressing.
Also a depressing show. So, of course, the depressing show has to continue, right? Like, we can only get the depressing. Okay, maybe it'll be happy Undone season 2. Yeah, we'll see what everyone does next from BoJack. Probably already working on stuff that's really exciting, because the show probably ended a little bit ago. Okay, yeah, that's it. Let us know what you thought about everything, and thanks for listening, guys. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.